They expected her to weep. They expected her to turn right back around when she stepped off that dusty coach and saw the blackened timbers of what used to be her new life. But she didn't. Margaret Tiller stood there, 52 years old, lace cuffs, trembling eyes steady staring at the ashes of the home she had come to claim. No husband, no welcome, just soot smoke and a stranger with one arm hammering iron in the barn that hadn't fallen. What no one knew is that Margaret wasn't just a mail-order bride. She had a secret tucked into the hem of her travel bag, a fortune no man had ever earned from her, and no fire could burn. But even with money, she couldn't buy respect. Not in a town that saw her age as a flaw. Not when her hips weren't dainty, her voice wasn't small, and her hands knew the ache of work. And yet, someone stayed. Silas Boone, the one-armed blacksmith, didn't say much, but he didn't flinch when she spoke. He didn't pity her when she picked up tools or patched roof beams. He simply made room beside the forge at the supper table and one day, in the blue chair on the porch. But something from her past is still buried, and as the snow falls soft over the land, they're quietly rebuilding that secret fortune, and what it cost her might just bring everything to a breaking point. What was she running from? And why does the man with half a body seem like the only one ever whole enough to see her? She came west to start over. But healing has a cost, and love it asks to be earned in silence and staying, and in the secrets we choose to share. The stagecoach rocked through wind and dust, but Margaret Tiller sat still, hands folded back straight, lips closed. She had spent 52 years learning to carry herself like a woman of less story and more silence. No one on the stage knew she was a bride. No one knew she was rich. And no one, not even the man she was to meet, knew the name she gave wasn't her birth name. All they saw was a woman in widow's black, polite but plain, with gray threaded hair tucked under a pinched hat. She looked like someone who had never raised her voice, and maybe that was true. But inside, under corset and cotton, Margaret carried a will forged by loss. She had lost a sister to childbirth, a husband to drink, and a farm to fire. But she had not lost herself. When she answered the mail-order advertisement, it wasn't for survival. It was for something more dangerous, a second beginning, and it terrified her. The town of Thornwood appeared like a smudge on the edge of the sky. Dust-coated buildings, empty corrals, one rusted bell tower that no longer rang. When the coach rolled to a stop, she stepped down with grace, gripping her carpet bag and scanning the road. But there was no man waiting, no buggy, no bouquet, just a boy freckled barefoot and wide-eyed pointing west with a stick. "You're for the blacksmith, he's out there. Follow the smoke." Smoke. Her heart lurched. She walked. Past fences split by wind, past cattle skeletons bleached by sun, and finally, to a homestead blackened and broken. The chimney stood like a tombstone. The barn was gone, and the house, or what had been a house, was nothing but charred beams and shattered windows. And there, near the ruin, hammering a single nail into a splintered doorframe, stood a man with one arm, Silas Boone, tall, broad, weather-stained. His left sleeve was pinned neatly at the shoulder. His good hand held a hammer with the grace of someone who had learned to do without. He turned at her footsteps. Their eyes met. He said nothing. Neither did she. Because there are moments when words would only get in the way of pain. She had crossed 3 states for a promise and found only ruin. But somehow, in the quiet of that broken yard, something ancient inside her whispered, "Stay." He hadn't said her name. He hadn't offered his hand. But in the stillness of that first meeting, something had begun. A flicker, a question, a second chance. The next morning, the sky broke open with rain. Not the kind that rushed, just soft, steady, like the land was weeping slow. Margaret Tiller stood under the lean-to beside what was left of the house, watching water beat on the ashes. She hadn't asked Silas Boone for permission to stay, and he hadn't asked what she was doing there. Instead, he had simply handed her a mug of boiled coffee that smelled of smoke and honesty. "Wasn't expecting you," he said finally, voice like gravel rolled through honey. "I gathered," she replied. They spoke little, but by noon Margaret had swept what could be swept, salvaged 3 bent pans and righted a bench with a cracked leg. She moved like a woman used to making do. Silas, meanwhile, hammered plank over plank, slow, precise, rebuilding a small shed out back where he slept since the fire. He didn't explain the fire. She didn't ask. But something in the way he worked one-handed, steady, uncomplaining, reminded her of the mule her father once loved more than money. Stubborn, kind-eyed, capable of pulling the weight of the world without complaint. By dusk he spoke again. "You came all this way." Why, she could have said the truth, that she'd inherited money nobody knew about, that she'd chosen him from the mail order listings, not out of desperation, but because of what he didn't say in his letter. But she only said, "I'd rather be useful somewhere broken than invisible somewhere whole." That night he brought in a second chair to the fire ring, said, "You don't have to stand." She sat. They shared silence like bread, simple, filling, warm. Silas didn't flirt. Margaret didn't pretend. And for the first time in years, no one expected her to be charming. She just was. The fire had already taken his home, and life had already stripped hers. But in the hushed rhythm of labor and rain, two weathered souls began to lean toward something unspoken. By the third week, routines had formed. Margaret Tiller rose before light and baked cornbread on a salvaged iron pan. She learned which hens laid and which lied. She stitched curtains from flour sacks and planted beans near the back wall, whispering to the seeds like they were old friends. Silas Boone built, quietly, endlessly. He never asked what she brought with her. Not the small satchel beneath the floorboards. Not the letters she reread by candlelight. But silence left too long begins to feel like distance. One night he didn't come in. Rain had started again sharp, this time needling the roof. She found him sitting on the porch's last dry plank, staring at the black woods. "Bad dream?" she asked gently. "No dream. Just remembering." She waited. "My wife died in that fire," he said. "2 winters back. House caught. Stove flew. I wasn't fast enough. I couldn't carry her." His jaw tightened. "And I didn't want company. Still don't." "Not really." Margaret nodded. "I'm not company," she whispered. "I'm just here." Later, alone in the shed, she opened her satchel. Inside, a velvet pouch of coin, deed papers from Missouri, and a ring, not gold but copper, shaped like a vine. She had lied about her name, lied about needing a husband, lied about being poor. But the truth was, she wasn't hiding out of shame. She was hiding to see if someone would choose her before they knew. And now she wasn't sure if Silas ever would. She came bearing gold and gave only silence. He carried grief and gave only space. But how long can two souls circle the truth without falling into it? The morning after her confession to no one but the moon, Margaret Tiller did what she had always done. She rose before dawn, swept the ashes, and stirred the biscuits. But something had shifted. She no longer feared being found out. She feared never being known. Silas Boone brought in a broken wagon wheel just after breakfast. His jaw was tighter than usual, his good hand bruised from stubborn nails. "Need help?" Margaret asked. He hesitated, then nodded. They worked in silence, her holding him, hammering. Every motion felt like a kind of truce. "I've never met a woman who could fix a wheel," he said quietly. She smiled. "That's because most never got the chance." That afternoon, a letter arrived, carried by a drifter who said the postmaster downtown had been holding it a month. Margaret recognized the handwriting, her real name scrawled across the envelope, not the one she gave in the advertisement. Inside, a short note from her solicitor. Final sale of her late husband's estate, the deed enclosed, the gold accounted for. All of it hers. Proof of who she truly was. She held the paper like it burned. Then, heart racing, she walked to Silas where he stood near the half-built barn. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. He didn't speak. She handed him the letter. "Let the truth breathe. I came here with money, with land, with a different name. I didn't come because I needed saving." Silas read slowly, lips tight, then looked up. "I figured," he said. "You did. You washed too well for someone desperate," he murmured. She laughed through the tears. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see if you'd stay, even if I had nothing." She stood in front of him, wind tugging her sleeves past, and future folding like laundry in the same basket. "And you?" she asked, voice trembling. "Would you stay if I had everything?" He looked at her a long time, then reached for her hand with the one he had, and held it like it meant everything. The lie was gone. The past laid bare, and yet neither one stepped back. Sometimes truth doesn't destroy what's fragile, it reveals what's strong. After the truth was laid down like kindling between them, something unexpected happened. Nothing crumbled. No one walked away. The sky didn't fall. Instead, life simply continued. Margaret Tiller now sat on the half-finished porch steps every morning with a mug of chicory brew, watching the land breathe. She still wore her plain cotton dress, still braided her hair tight, but now she looked people and Silas Boone in the eye. She no longer flinched at being seen. The townsfolk began to whisper, of course. A widow with money living out by the blacksmith with one arm and a burned-down home. There were theories, but no one said a word to her face, until one Sunday when Pastor Hill stopped by after service, hat in hand, eyes kind but cautious. "We'd be glad to have you at the chapel," he said. "And the ladies' circle, they'd be honored. We heard you know a thing or two about sewing." Margaret smiled gently. "I know more about mending than making." He smiled wider. "That's enough." That night Silas sat beside her beneath the stars, a blanket between them. "There's enough wood for a roof now," he said. "Barn's almost set." She nodded. "What about the house?" He hesitated. "Don't know. Feels strange rebuilding it." "Just for me." She turned to him. "Then don't." He blinked. "Build it for us or not at all." No kiss followed. No grand vow. Just a long silence where the wind touched their hands and neither pulled away. The kind of silence that meant something had already been said with presence, with staying with choice. They didn't fall in love like a match struck fast. They grew it like something planted deep and tended daily. And in the ashes of yesterday's loss, a home began to take shape. Autumn came early that year. The winds turned crisp, the fields turned gold, and the barn stood tall with its new roof, part Silas, part Margaret, and part the silence they shared in hammer blows and sawdust-laced laughter. But it wasn't just a structure they built. It was a rhythm, a belonging, a sense that this land scarred, scorched, stitched back together could hold more than just memory. One evening, Margaret brought out a small box wrapped in linen. "For you," she said, handing it to Silas. He opened it slowly. Inside, a leather apron, handmade, stitched strong, where his missing arm would have rested. And beside it, a small carving, a whittled figure of a man and woman standing under a tree. "I carved that when I still thought I'd stay only a season," she said. "Turns out I was wrong about seasons." Silas looked at her, eyes shining but quiet. "Turns out," he said slowly, "you were right about roots." That night they sat on the porch and watched as the stars spilled across the heavens like spilled salt. "I used to think love was a fire," he said. "Hot, fast, dangerous. Something you lose everything to." Margaret nodded. "Sometimes it is. But other times, it's a hearth, quiet, warm. You just have to keep tending it." They said no vows, signed no paper. But when Silas built a second chair for the porch and carved her name into the beam above the doorway, Margaret knew. She was chosen, not needed, not rescued, chosen. They began with broken things, a burned house, a false name, an empty table. But what they built together was real, and that kind of truth always holds. Winter arrived soft that year, not with blizzards or thunder, but in hushed mornings and the quiet crunch of frost under boots. The house was done, not grand, not flawless, but upright, warm, and stitched with the marks of two people who stayed. Margaret Tiller, once a woman riding west in fear, now stood at the hearth with flour on her sleeves and a song on her breath. Children from nearby farms stopped in for warm bread and lessons. The townsfolk, once suspicious, now waved when they passed the gate. She never told them the full truth about her name or the money. She didn't need to. Here she was, Margaret Boone, because one morning Silas carved both their names into the back door, same as he did the porch beam. Quietly, like a prayer. One evening, as the snow fell in soft shivers across the field, Silas lit the oil lamp, set 2 mugs of cider down and said, "You know, I used to think I lost everything when the fire took the house." Margaret looked at him. "But turns out the fire made room," he said, "for someone better." She reached for his hand, wrinkled, calloused, strong in its own way. "Not better," she whispered, "just ready." They didn't speak of the past much after that, because some wounds don't vanish, but they fade when held with care. And in that house of second chances, two hearts beat steady, not because they were saved, but because they were seen. And maybe someone watching this today needed to know it's never too late to be chosen, never too late to stay. Sometimes home isn't a place you find. It's something you build one nail, one meal one evening, silence at a time. Margaret didn't come west for love. She came for dignity, for a chance to live the rest of her life on her terms. And Silas, a man marked by loss, didn't ask for company, but he offered kindness anyway. That's how it begins, doesn't it? Not with declarations, but with staying, with quiet, with respect. Maybe you've been burned by life. Maybe the homestead you once dreamed of is gone lost to fire time or the carelessness of others. But like Margaret, you still carry something precious inside you, even if no one else sees it yet. And maybe someone will. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you believe that even a scarred hand can build something beautiful again, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Would you want to see more stories like Margaret and Silas's? Do you believe in love that comes after everything? Subscribe to None. Wild West Saga for more gentle, late-blooming stories of dignity, healing, and hope told the slow, meaningful way. And remember, it's never too late to be wanted, never too late to be chosen. We're glad you're here. Truly,